Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Uh, as I heard, my name's Garrett Scott. I have the distinct honor of leading the security teams here nationally at Red8. Let me see here. Oh, good. We have our insights. So Red8 is the consulting and solutions arm of Insight, and along with the Insight financial backing, and I think we've exceeded a 1 billion under management now, plus second gear. We're able to assist our clients across a spectrum of technologies and services. So summarization, if you have a need to consume a product or a service between these three companies, I can probably guarantee we can find terms that you like. Red8 has 5 specialized practices depending on the tech. There's the data center practice, the security practice, DevOps, cloud and automation, and our advanced analytics. As I mentioned earlier, security practice I help lead is quite deep across the spectrum. I'll give just a quick summary. Whether it's like next-gen firewalls, Palo, Cisco, hardware services, even consuming those virtually in the cloud, which, as I mentioned, cloud automation. Our team has a passion with coming up with automation and config management. So you see a red talk coming up around infrastructure as code, DevSecOps. Don't miss it. It'll be well worth it. It'll open your eyes to see what's possible in a very short period of time. Security practice does also like cybersecurity maturity assessments, risk assessments. We do strategic discussions around risk management. Resident engineers and engineering on demand too, but those are more tactical when our clients need to flex and immediately get somebody in there. I personally prefer that we be more of a strategic partner, focusing on de-risking and helping decrease like attack surfaces or consolidating tools, etc. Speaking of passion, John McGloughlin's been a close partner of Red8, not to mention being a trusted advisor for me personally for a time that I've lost count, I assure you. Let me pass it over to John Mack, and take us away, sir.
Okay, thank you, Garrett, and welcome everybody to this webinar, and I hope everybody out there is staying safe, healthy. And so today, Red8's asked me to come in and talk to the group about productive hybrid cybersecurity relationships. And so what this is about is companies that hire partners to ride alongside with their firms in terms of their cybersecurity operations or SecOps. And there's other aspects of that, including vulnerability management as well and compliance. And Red8's a great partner of ours. We have a number of opportunities with them, customers with them, where we ride alongside under their umbrella and handle their SecOps. GuardSight itself is a tactical cybersecurity company. So we'll go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about our two companies first. I think you know Red8, but of course they're a leading systems integrator. And we do everything. GuardSight, as I mentioned, is a tactical cybersecurity company. So when it comes to compliance and risk, enterprise level risk assessments, governance, these types of things, we defer to our partner. And when it comes to security operations, tactical security operations, Red8 defers to GuardSight in a lot of cases. So we are a cybersecurity threat detection and response provider. And we have the best jobs in the world. If you see some of my videos out on YouTube where I talk about SecOps and the type of passion that you need to get into SecOps, it's about getting in the fight. We work in air-conditioned buildings. We get paid to do this. We get to hunt bad guys. We're probably going to go home alive tonight. I mean, these are all really cool things about SecOps, and the people that surround us in terms of our employees and the Red8 employees share that same passion, and that's really what this is about today. So we can go to the next slide. So I have 3 or 4 slides. I give this talk regularly. It is my favorite talk to give, by the way. I talk about a lot of things, including threat hunting, and I'm old now. I started my career in the late 80s, and so I've spent most of my life in the Linux world, and I talk a lot about these types of things when it comes to threat hunting and cyber weaponry and other things like that. But this is my favorite talk because it's really about it's not about that. It's not about the next new tool or the next new weapon, and I'll dive into that. The slides are effectively 3 or 4 slides. At first, I'm just going to talk to the audience about what is hybrid security. Why should you be thinking about it? Why is it beneficial to your company? What's the value proposition on that? I'm going to talk about the challenges that we have in cyber. And I think when you hear me talk about some of those challenges from either, if you're a CISO at a company or if you're a ground pounder, getting up every day and encountering the enemy, I think a lot of these anecdotes that I give and use cases that I talk about will resonate. And the idea is for us to identify those challenges as a team and make sure that we are getting focused on where we need to go. And that's the third slide, which is like, how do we actually do that as a team? And so to start off with, what we'll talk about here is just in general, what is hybrid cybersecurity. So what's happening in the marketplace, of course, is that we have a high demand and low supply when it comes to cyber. We've got, I don't know, some reports say as high as 3.5 million worldwide of a shortage of cyber analysts in worldwide. And in our country, in the U.S. alone, I think it's upwards of 1 million. And of course, the attack landscapes or the attack vectors are continuing to increase, and that requires us to deal with it, and it's hard. And so one of the things that companies have started to do is say, why don't we bring in a partner to help us on the tactical ends, on the GRC ends, to help us ride alongside with us. And that's what hybrid security is about. In some cases, we have SMB customers that we are the sole provider of that. In other cases, we have enterprise customers where we're effectively a special ops unit within their company that rides alongside their SOC teams. And the conversation today is kind of a lot about riding along with other SOC teams, but we have both cases, and in both instances, we bring the same level of passion. So we're effectively a hired gun that you hire us for. And the way that I look at the world is what I call the OAR model, the operations assessments and response model. And I've tacked compliance on the end of that because that, of course, is extremely important. Tactical guys sometimes forget that, but it's overall risk management and compliance is why we're doing this to begin with. So that's kind of our guidelines. But from a tactical perspective, I kind of think about it as OAR, and that's how I remember it, like the acronym OAR, like an oar in a boat. And on the ops side, it's about live detection and response. So bad guys shooting at you, do you know what to do? Cyber weapons inspections. Like a lot of times we have weapons in the environment that we've spent lots of CapEx on, and let's go buy another tool that'll solve the problem. And then of course I've been on thousands, hundreds of thousands of incident response situations where I get in there, or my team gets in there. I'm not on the ground as much anymore, but my team gets in there, and their weapons are have eroded or decayed or something like that. So weapons inspections are really important. And the final thing I think about in the operations mode is just threat hunting or data patrol. So the scenario here is, bad guy got a ticket to get into the stadium. He looks like everybody else. He's living off the land. How do you find him? Of course, assessments is about, reducing your attack surface, measuring your attack surface, determining where, threat actors would attempt to compromise you and getting those reduced. And response, of course, is about post-compromise. And this is I give this talk too. It's about the, what I call the pucker moment. If anybody on the phone, I'm sure everybody on the phone has been involved in some form of incident response. The first thing is boom, there's this fog, and what do we do and how do we prepare? And you can get into tabletop exercises, and we do those. But the thing is like until you're actually in it, it's the Mike Tyson's term. What does he say? Once you get punched in the nose, everything changes. Having a good mission model, what we call that, and a good model to take on response is extremely important. And get prepared for it because it's going to happen. It's not if it'll happen, it's when it'll happen. So you probably have heard that too. And so we work great along Red8. We've done multiple incident responses with them, and they are familiar with our process and the way it works. And one of the things we try to do is get the companies involved with that process too. The second thing, so this is a combined approach. The second thing I would say is the reason that hybrid security is beneficial to a company is because it gets you focused on the hygiene management. So the analogy that I like to use is and the Red8 people have heard me say this 1,000 times, probably like, he keeps using that analogy, but it's a good one. I was in a pitch deck situation one time, like a Shark Tank situation, and it wasn't just about tech companies. It was like all these different companies. And there was a guy next to me we were waiting for our turn to go in and pitch, and this dude was a fighter pilot, and his call sign was Mad Dog, and he was a total Mad Dog. I mean, complete Mad Dog. And he used this analogy. He was telling me about being a fighter pilot. We were just talking. I was, intrigued by this. And he says, being a fighter pilot is like 98% boredom accentuated by 2% sheer terror. And cyber is kind of like that. it's 98% boredom accentuated by 2% sheer terror. Or it could be 40% boredom accentuated by 60% sheer terror. You want to get that 98-2 ratio going, and that's what cyber hygiene management is about. It's a 24/7, 365 endeavor that you have to prepare for and undertake and get committed to get in the fight. And the cyber is your friend on that. You'll see that I've got it underneath there, which is identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. It's a great framework. I think it's the best framework I've seen. We use it. It's how we guide our customers through maturation. I know Red8 uses it. This doesn't exclude 27001 or the other frameworks that you'll use, but CSF is a really good framework. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it and you're starting out, say, where do I start? I'd say call Red8, but also Google NIST CSF. It's really useful. And they've done a great job at that. NIST is great, obviously a great organization, taxpayer funded. We love them. They're fantastic. They do all types of good works. The final thing I think is just establishing a standard of reasonable cybersecurity. So for those of you in California, you're becoming familiar with the CCPA, I'm certain. And of course, New York's got some laws coming out. All 50 states have some form of privacy laws and different things, and those are going to continue. Regulation is going to continue. And one of the things that you need to be able to do is you need to be able to provide evidence and documentation, artifacts that you're conducting reasonable cybersecurity. And that's one thing that you can do when you have a hybrid company alongside of you. So for example, every time we send out a weekly KPI or KRI report to our customers, it always includes a statement about this document or this artifact represents a reasonable cybersecurity. Now that of course doesn't, just because you produce the artifact, doesn't mean anything. You have to actually be doing it, but it's a good place to start. And I think from a management perspective, when you see that stuff, you know that your teams are doing it, or at least you're, have to get down there and expect them to do it. And that's the thing, is about setting expectations across the board when you're dealing in tactical cybersecurity, establishing standards, and then expecting those results, measuring your results. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, great. Okay, so here are the challenges. Here are some of the collective challenges we have in teams. Now, I've been in lots of SOCs. I've led lots of people. I've been a follower. I've had the great fortune of working with some of the best CISOs in the country at large banks, large entertainment companies, large insurance companies. I mean, just some really good folks. And the ones that are the most, and for that matter, the small to medium-sized businesses that have really good leadership. And so I'm going to talk at different levels, but it definitely starts at the top. Where it happens, though, the leadership happens down, with what we'll call the ground pounders, the folks that are actually involved with, daily encounters with the enemy, and keeping them motivated and getting them pumped up and passionate about what they do. And so leadership is about experience, and it's about being inspirational in terms of cybersec ops. So I talked about the 98-2. We do all kinds of silly things in cyber sometimes, which is so cyber has all different types of domains, even at the tactical level. Maybe you're somebody who handles the queue. HOD, handler on duty. Maybe you're somebody that's part of a quick reaction force, somebody that's responsible for overflow, or when we get an incident, you're going to parachute in and take care of it. Or maybe you're a captain or a co-captain on a team. All of these different things are things that happen inside a SOC, and it's the cadence and the fluidity that happens inside the SOC. Sometimes what we do in leadership, though, is we'll say, oh, that guy's really good at HOD, and he just stays on HOD, or she just stays on HOD. And eventually, not only does that person not expand their horizons, and they don't get to see all theaters in terms of, the different attack vectors and the threat landscapes that we see, but that they also grow, they also erode, they decay, because they're not expanding, they're not experiencing. I mean, I've found, for me, getting, for example, folks that are on help desk teams into the SOC has been a boon for me personally, because of, their energy and their drive and their passion. But as a leader in experience, that comes into play. And what I would say is, for all the managers and CISOs that are on the call, or even, your SOC line managers, this is the key to your success. It starts with you. You own it. You have to be accountable for it. You got to put these players in position and get them jacked up to be able to come to work every day and fight. And because that's what you're doing. I mean, this is the new battlefield. The bad guys are here to cause you harm, injury, pain. And if you're not inspiring these people to get in the fight every single day, you're going to fail. It's just that simple. And then so that leads me into teamwork. So now we've got some good leadership in place. A lot of times what we see is that personality, people are people. I'm not talking about bad hair days, but I'm talking about just sometimes hiring. I'm not saying like all really smart people are malcontents. That's not my message. As much as it is like that sometimes when you hire like really people that have a lot of experience, or my schnizzle doesn't stink, they're malcontents. And it doesn't matter how smart you are or how experienced you are. If you're a malcontent, you're not good for the team. And the ultimate deal is we fight the bad guys as a team. And so my message there is like the fight is out there. Make sure the fight is always out there. And if you have defects in the system and defects in your personalities, you got to fix that. Either change it, get people moving in the right direction, or something like that. It happens. But I see a lot of that when I go into some of the larger environments is just, some toxicity in there. And you want to eliminate that, just address it, get rid of it. Like your energy should be focused on, taking the bad guy out versus taking each other out. The next thing I think is a challenge for us is just basically the oversaturation of cyber weapons. And, every day there's a new tool. Everybody on the phone knows this. And it's not about the weaponry. Well, it is about the weaponry, but it's you can't just buy a weapon, a cyber weapon. When I say a cyber weapon, I'm talking about everything from sword tools to EDR to IPS IDSs to SIMs. We all use them. They're in every one of our environments. But the answer isn't to just go buy a weapon. If you've got defects in your environment and you're not doing a good job, you need to first kind of look at the balance of that. And do we have the right balance of people to weaponry, that kind of deal. And I think over time, we're going to see security is we still have that expertise that is in demand, but over time that's going to also become commoditized because robots are going to do more and automation is going to do more for us. But I would say that the challenge there is just identifying a nice balance of weaponry and people, and adding more weapons to the pile is not always. Somebody's got a song there. There we go. Yeah, can we go back to that slide, Brian? I think we just had some feedback there. Yep, there we go. Okay, so balance. And that'll lead me to my final thing, which is fatigue. And this happens throughout the chain of command. Trust me, for the ground pounders, if you don't appreciate the CISO in your organization, maybe 2, 3, 4 levels above you, I don't know. Trust me, they're fatigued too. And as a matter of fact, they are fatigued in a much different way. They have great responsibility, especially if you have a large organization. And the CISOs out there know what I'm talking about. But the ground pounders can get fatigued too. And the thing I like to say is that cyber is an always-on business. It's replete with nefarious activity all the time. And so what you have to do is you have to identify that, and you have to identify that people are people are people are people. The robots are great. They come to work every day. They show up. They don't give you a hard time. They don't have bad hair days. They just do their jobs over and over. But we also have carbon forms still, assisting these robots. And as long as we have that, we have to, embrace the fact that there's going to be fatigue, and we have to have particular ways to deal with that. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Then I'll kind of talk about some of the ways that we deal with these things. Okay, so and when I think about these things, about some of the challenges that we had in the first page, I think all of it starts with a mission understanding. And this happens from the top down. I mentioned the fact that I've had the great fortune of working with some of the country's best CISOs. I've also had the great fortune of working with some of the country's best help desk people that became SOC analysts and everything in between. And the thing that I find in companies, and when we work with companies, whether again they're SMBs or whether they're enterprise level guys, is that mission understanding is P1. Everybody on the team has to understand our mission. Everybody on the team has to understand their role in that mission. We also have to establish a belief system in that for all of us to adhere to. So, for example, value creation, operational excellence, customer intimacy are some of the things that we have at GuardSight that everybody subscribes to. If you don't subscribe to that, you're on the wrong team. If you're not focused on the mission that we're all trying to get accomplished, you're on the wrong team. those kind of things. If you are somebody that wants to catch the 1700 bus every day, or I call it the 1700 bus, then you might be on the wrong team. Cyber is a highly energetic, active environment. 7 SAN certs aren't going to do it. I love SAN certs. We have SAN certs. Of course, all of us have those things. But the fact of the matter is that's not just going to do it. You've got to bring it, and you've got to understand your mission, and that starts at the top, and it goes all the way down the chain. And the other thing with that is establishing those standards and that value systems helps us separate emotion from reason, which is what we want to be able to do. And accountability and trust of each other in these environments is extremely important. You have to know that one analyst or operator, depending on if you're where you come from. If you come from the intelligence community, the analyst may not be the right word you'd like to see, but analysts or operators, if you think about those, we call them SOC analysts, is each one of those has to have each other's backs. And they know, at GuardSight, for example, they know that I can trust that my brother or my sister is going to have my back and will operate at the same level that I operate at. I mean, it really starts with that. Like, there's no weaponry, before any of the weaponry happens, it has to happen there. And accountability and ownership. So I'd say when you leave here from this webinar today, if you're having some dysfunction in your security operations center or with your analysts, start there. Like, have you defined their mission? Do they know what they're supposed to do? Are they trained properly? Do they get up in the morning and, or some, folks that, work at night or, those kind of things. Do they get up and do they want to fight? And assess that. And if you don't have that, might not be the right people for the team, but it might be you. And you need to own that mission. And you need to own that, setting the charter for that and getting teams in moving in the right direction. Okay, which leads me into the second thing. You have to have a warrior mentality to be in SecOps. It may not be in certain other domains of cyber, but if you want to be in SecOps, you're going to be in the fight, and you got to be prepared to do that. And I talked about fatigue, and we're going to show you some examples of how to manage that. But the fact of the matter is that you have to have that warrior mentality. SecOps is a full contact sport, and you can expect daily contact with the enemy. That's just the way it works. And how you manage your environment and how you control your destiny is up to you. And are you capable of taking the enemy out? Are you capable of defending the assets? Because that's your primary mission, at least on the SecOps side. This is what the company has hired you to do. And if you understand that and you bring that warrior mentality, that is, 75, 80% of the battle, quite frankly. I mean, that's what you need to be doing. And SecOps is like that. And it can be exciting. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, you get to fight bad guys and work in air-conditioned buildings. I mean, think about it. I mean, even in what we're going through right now, SecOps is still running, and it's going to be running for a long time. So for those ground pounders that are on the phone, if you've got that attitude, you change your attitude, which is basically get a warrior mentality. Love it. It's probably the best job you're ever going to have, really. The third thing I would say is just generally is, a process choreography. So like at GuardSight, for example, and the Red8 team knows this because they integrate with them, is what we call a work instruction system. And so some of the folks that are on the phone that know me are like, oh man, his work instructions. We got work instructions littered throughout the country. And this is effectively standard operating procedures, and the format that they're in is, completely organizational dependent. Some folks are in Confluence, some folks are in wikis. We use wikis for that kind of stuff, but they could be anything. The format that are in are less important than the fact that you have them. And this is basically about how we can work ourselves out of a job. We don't want to work ourselves out of GuardSight or Red8 or work ourselves out of the companies that are on the phone as much as we want to work ourselves out of a job. What that does is that helps us get a decentralized workforce. And so we have the ability to spread our knowledge across multiple people, and we're a much more effective unit when we do that. Our strength in numbers really shows in that particular case. Plus, the other thing I think you'll get there that the companies that are on the phone listening to this is that if you have an existing MDR, an existing MSP, or cybersecurity as a service provider, you should be asking this too, because a lot of times these people are leaving. You got to remember, you're in a high demand, low supply situation. And in cyber, people are leaving. They go for various reasons. Could be fatigue, could be money, whatever the case is. I mean, it's going to happen. And so if you've put all this knowledge in one particular individual and that knowledge is not disseminated and decentralized, well, when they leave, you're going to have a hole. It's that simple. And so one of the things that you want to do for that is develop processes and work instructions. And I also call it evolve and go deep. If you look at the maturation of a customer, like when we first get on target to, where we end up with them, they're typically, two different, environments. In the first environment, they may not be so mature, but by the time we, go 4 quarters down the road, we're much more mature, because what we've done is we've evolved and we've gone deep. There's nuance in every theater that you go into for a customer. And that's important, because every business is different, quite frankly. I mean, you may have the same weaponry, the attack vectors and threat landscapes may look similar. Retail threat landscapes are, generally the same, and, biopharma threat landscapes are generally the same. But there's nuances in every single one of those customers. It could be the people, it could be the tools that they use that are supporting your effort, that kind of stuff. And so you have to evolve, and you have to go deep, like get down to the bottom. The big fish swim at the bottom. That's where you want to be. And then the final thing here is just about innovation. And this is about really helping us to manage fatigue. So this is the situation where we're talking about, that's stupid. Like, there is no such thing as that's stupid. It's all backlog. If you get an idea from your analysts, like sometimes even the least experienced person, I'm not talking about the new guy that's come in and he's got, 2 mouths in one ear. I'm not talking about that guy. I'm talking about like an analyst who might have been, they are ground pounding. They're in the fight. They've had all those reps. They might actually have good ideas. And sometimes those get stifled because you get the old grizzled vet that's just like, that's stupid. Nobody would ever do it that way. We've always done it this way. You want to get out of that mode. You want to get into the mode, like put it on the backlog, have your team have a meeting on backlogs whenever that happens. This is what we do at GuardSight, weekly meetings with Red8 knows this. They've been part of these things where you effectively come in and address some of the backlogs. That's your innovation. And there are different skill sets on the team. Some folks are, much better at, maybe they have, software development backgrounds, and other folks are, maybe have networking backgrounds. So you want to take that mosaic of skills and mosaic of experience, and you want to, turn that into innovation. One of the things I like to do here, and I've taught myself this because, I didn't always do it very well, which is that when somebody gives you an idea, I think a lot of times what we do is engineers or as people that are implementers or tactical people, is we immediately start thinking about the implementation. And what we've done there is we're starting to set up obstacles. Well, we'd have to go around this, and we'd have to go around that. Like to, get yourself into a cooling off period. I'm not talking about, they're bleeding out, not that situation. I'm talking about the situation like, here's an idea. The idea is let's the very first thing we do, let's just record it and get it on our backlog. And then what we'll do is review our backlog and figure out where it fits, just like a software development team would work. It's the same kind of concept. And get into the mode of accepting people's ideas and being receptive to those. Now, not all ideas are good. We all know that. I've had way more stupid ideas than I've had good ideas. That's for sure. And quite frankly, I think everybody on the phone can attest to that. It's the same thing in there. One of the things that you'll do with that, though, is you will erode any barrier of trust that might have been formulated otherwise. So by me accepting somebody's idea in terms of its backlog doesn't mean that I agree with them. It doesn't mean that I disagree with them. It just means that we both agree that we're going to put it on a backlog and assess it. And that's what helps innovation. Innovation is also going to help us drive down fatigue, because what we're trying to do is do more with less. And so that requires innovation. Our whole country is built on, the whole world is built on innovation. The innovation doesn't start, though, until you start measuring and tuning stuff. And I would say I've picked this up from just working with some of the best CISOs in the country about, their quants, and they're about measuring things and then identifying where we can improve and tune things. And so you want to measure and tune. If you're not measuring today, you got to measure and tune and find out what's important. The way that we find out what's important is we ask, because what's important to me and what I think is important at the ground level is, may not be important to the guy at the top. And it's just the way the world works. However, that you can also have the inverse of that. The things that are important to the guys at the top might not be important to the things at the guys at the bottom. And you have to, and guys and gals, of course, but you have to figure out what that is and measure it and then tune it. And tuning, is about basically, creating some harmony. So eliminating the dysfunction in the measurement or the noise in the measurements and and tuning it up. The other thing I would say is suppress and patrol is a technique that we use here. So these are, the trust but verify edict that we have in cybersecurity. And so the idea here is that we try to respond to everything all at once. Sometimes attack prioritization is going to help you with that. SLAs are going to help you with that. But if you get into the mode of suppress and patrol, which is if you think about walking your beat, something might look out of place, but not that out of place. You kind of see it as a shape. As human beings, we're good at this stuff. We know when things are out of place, and so we might not actually have to deal with that right now. It's not a critical issue. And then so what we can do is suppress, but we have to patrol it. So I'll give you other anecdotes. Sometimes I've been in new environments where, they've had 30,000 alerts that aren't even answered, but they might already be low or medium alerts or whatever it is, the prioritization schema at that particular organization. But that's unacceptable. You can't have that. You got to, if we were to measure that, if we were to measure by any standard, that would be unacceptable. And if the brass knew about it, they would say that's unacceptable. The way to deal with that is like we do have a high, concentration of alerts in cyber, and for the people that are on the ground, they know this. The idea is potentially suppress and patrol that, and then apply some innovation to that. You might also have SOAR packages, and now we've got ML and AI in the picture, but these are the things that will help you do that. So what you're trying to do is kind of separate some of the noise from the really important signal, but you can't ignore the noise, because sometimes that noise adding up might represent low and slow. They were in the organization and they've been there for a long time, so their dwell time is 6 months. I mean, that's typical. And so by just addressing, suppressing, and patrolling, and there are different times when you can patrol. I would say every single day on a SecOps unit, if you're currently not running threat hunts and patrols, you got to do that. 100% have to do that. Bad guys are sophisticated. We build a weapon, we say, haha, we got you. They're like, no, you don't. They move around it. We build the weapon, we say, haha, we got you. They say, no, you don't. They move around it. And today they're really good at living off the land. They've figured out how to do that, whether it's through social engineering or, whether they've just been able to reverse engineer the detection technology and be able to do it. And so the challenge there is to be able to make sure that you're patrolling things. So if you kind of think about taking a pile of data and putting it in the patrol category, and then making the units responsible for patrolling that data, and then coming out with, whether or not the indicators are compromised or positive or negative through that patrol, that'll give you a model to follow. There's no one right model. You'll find your own model, but if you think about it at that level, I think you can do it. The final thing I would say for just innovation and fatigue, and this is no joke, is physiology, man. You gotta exercise, and you gotta go dark. And when I say go dark, our teams know what that means, because they'll communicate, I'm going dark. I mean, I love that. Sometimes I'll call my analysts and say, hey, I don't know if you're working today, but are you dark today? If they are, I just hang up the phone. I go back to someone else in the security operations center to get the information that I need at that particular time. But the idea of going dark is you have to get away. And you have to sleep, and you have to shut it down. Cyber's, I talked about it being an always-on, replete with nefarious activity. And, I kind of, a sarcastic remark about the 1700 bus. But in reality, the folks that are in the fight every single day know that you got to go dark. You need to sleep. Your body needs to sleep. And that's a really big thing. Or getting away from the environment altogether. But I think what you want to do with that is everybody on the team has to have a contract for that. And we all have to agree that when a guy goes dark or a gal goes dark, they're dark. Like we don't need them. Like, go away. And we know how to fight without them. And that's where you need to get yourself prepared. And that's a good way to deal with fatigue. And of course, you got to exercise. Physiology is really important. I did talk about us, sitting in air-conditioned buildings and getting paid for it. And when I say sitting in air-conditioned buildings, of course, we all have stand-up desks. Our guys here have stand-up desks, all that good stuff. But and for that matter, we've got punching bags and dumbbells and all that other stuff here too. Because I'm a believer in you have to in order for your mind to be there, your body has to be there first. And we do things like yoga here and all that other kind of stuff, and that's all great. You have to have those types of techniques in terms of exercise. So for those folks that are on the ground that aren't exercising, exercise. It will help you see pictures clearer, and that's a good way for innovation. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I don't know if what we have next, Brian, if there are questions or if we're done, but I'm here to answer questions.
No, I saw some questions come across. Brian, have them, I think.
I do. Thank you so much, John. So the first question is, what training program do you recommend to keep your analysts up to date on the threats out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. How about everything? We get that a lot. Like, what book should I read? What class should I go to? What I would say is the thing that I do to keep myself trained and up on the various attack types is to latch on to some various distribution lists. It depends on where you're at in your organization. And there's a lot of good weapons companies that have great distribution lists that you can get on. One I'm thinking about for in terms of like maybe tactical might be a recorded future or something like that. Active countermeasures, those guys over there are ass kickers when it comes to threat hunting. They will lead you to all types of stuff. Follow SecOps companies because we're always publishing. Our analysts are responsible for our Twitter and our LinkedIn feeds. So our LinkedIn feed is more business related. Our Twitter feeds are more technical related. But you'll see our analysts produce, once a day they're producing something about some particular TTP that you should be looking at, and they'll give credit to. And then usually what that does is proliferates. It's like this big web, where you can then say, oh, that guy's really cool. I like Daniel Meisler myself. I think his stuff is really good. I read the WSJ Pro every morning. I get, Fortune's term sheet, which sometimes has to do with cyber. For the tactical folks, the training programs are about probably, as I said, latching on to some of those Twitter feeds that from the various SecOps companies that are out there, MDR companies. They're going to be publishing interesting techniques. I like Darktrace; they publish a lot of really cool stuff, and then kind of go from there, and then maybe hone in on a particular domain. The thing about cyber, of course, is if you're not in it, what you won't know is there are several domains. For those of you who are in it, you know what I'm talking about. And there's so much opportunity in cyber. It depends on where you want to be. So if you're in a vulnerability management, detection, maybe, Nexpos is your friend there. If, you're into, cyber SecOps, GuardSight and Red8 are your friend there. Red8 is also your friend and all that kind of stuff. So that would be my answer. There's no one training program. We have folks that have, a billion certificates. We have folks that have no certificates. Everybody has different value. It just kind of depends on where you want to be, from your career perspective.
Okay, great. And then just a reminder, if anyone else has questions, we do have one more, but feel free to enter that into the chat and we can fit that in. So then the other question that we have, John, is at what size should a company create a SOC?
Okay, that's a good question. There is no company is too small. If you're going to create a SOC internally, you could do that, with one person and hire an external provider like Red8 and GuardSight. The enterprise companies know that, I think it probably kind of depends on, two things: the types of information that you're protecting. So we'll talk about it in terms of attack surface, and just in general, you controlling your hygiene. So like I mentioned, we have different size customers in our portfolio. We have customers that, do 10 million, and we have customers that do, 30 billion, 40 billion. And they all have a different, perspective on how they run their SOCs. Of course, with the companies that are doing 30 or 40 billion, they have full-on SOC teams. They have security operations center with high-tech, everything. Companies that have maybe 10 million, maybe what they've got is an IT department. And of course, the owner of the company in those smaller companies is going to say, you're an IT guy, your job is security. That's not really the IT guy's specific domain, but the IT guy can absolutely play in that domain and create a SOC. And I would say, a SOC is, we call it our cyber SOC, and we have a physical building and then the rest of that good stuff. But a lot of times cyber is also virtual. The guy in Bulgaria that's hacking it might be, sitting in his mom's basement, and, or he could be, in another part of the world as part of a nation state team in a really sophisticated environment. So the answer to the question is, it just depends. If you're going to go out and build a SOC, you probably have a $100 million company, maybe a $50 million company, I don't know. But anything above that, you've got a bigger attack surface. And so, but if you're going to hire hybrid teams alongside of you, your SOC may consist of, a guy in a cube, or a gal in a cube. It could be that. It just depends, kind of on, threat landscapes, what you're protecting. I would say, though, in general, what the hybrid approach gives you, it gives you control. Like you want to be able to decouple from your provider. So if you hire GuardSight, you want to be able to decouple from them. And on the front end, you want to be able to do that. We actually just answered a response to something simple like that. It was a great question that was in the RFP, which was, how do we decouple from you? I'm paraphrasing it, but that's basically what it meant. And so the answer to the question would be, I don't know that there's any company that's too small to create a SOC. You could have a virtual SOC. And by the way, if you think about that, just by telling your company today, if you leave today and you've got a company of 20 people and you say to them, we're going to create a SOC, you're it. If you think about that very number one here that says mission understanding, there's your mission. Like, we have a security operations center. Congratulations. It looks just like your IT operations center. It's your cube, and there's your SOC. And so I would start there. Of course, the bigger companies, might actually build physical places, but I mean, the physical cybersecurity centers today probably aren't doing, getting too much activity because everybody's working from home. And so you have to be prepared for that too. We all do now. I mean, I think it was all, let's just go to this, building and all work together. By the way, there's huge value in that. I would say, especially if you talk to some of the less experienced analysts on the team or the more experienced analysts on our team, they'll tell you that talk, that banter, that camaraderie is all only, there's nothing that replaces like that with people being in the same location, physical location. So that might be a roundabout way to answer your question into like, what's the right size for the company? I think there's multiple factors that go into that. I would say if your gut feels, if you're in a position where you feel like, hey, you know what we need to do? We need a security operations center where we're going to define a mission. It might be an 8x8 room. We have some customers that have 10 by 10 rooms, I guess, with a couple 3 people in it, and that's their SOC. And GuardSight is their augmentation group, their hybrid group, their special operations that's taking off that helping with that 98% that I talked about, the 98 to 2. So it just kind of depends on, I guess, your gut and what your threat landscape looks like. And there might be some issues, you talk to your, if you have in-house legal counsel, they'll help you with that too. Do we need it? What's it cost? How much should we spend on it? All those factors come into play.
Great, thank you. And then one other question came through. It's a two-parter. So what is the best way to determine if and when a pen test should be done? Okay. The second part to that is, how do security leaders present this to their executives as a standard best practice?
Okay, cool. 2 good questions. Like those. The other questions are good too. Right. So first of all, we'll separate the and the guys that do pen tests for a living too will probably say, well, security guys are always very, very nuanced. So what I think the first thing you got to think about is when you think about risk assessments, which is what you're talking about at the highest level, you get into these tactical, logical, and technical risk assessments, which are you assessing your threat landscape. You want to probably use the vernacular of vulnerability assessments and penetration assessments. And I'll use an analogy that to help understand that. So vulnerability assessments are about us measuring your attack surface, but you could kind of think about it like somebody walking around your building saying, if I were to break into your building, I would probably go through that window right there because I could see that it's broken or it doesn't have a lock on it. Or, I might, tailgate in with a human being or something like that. These would be vulnerability assessments. What they're going to do is they're going to tell you where the vulnerabilities are in the assets that threat actors most likely would take advantage of. By the way, the threat actors may be on the inside. So, and they may have actually gotten a job at your company if you're large enough for that distinct purpose. It's much easier to just get a job in a company and then go from the inside out than it might be to come from the outside in. So, ingress to egress versus egress to, or ingress to egress versus egress to ingress to egress. So the first part is a vulnerability assessment. The second part is a penetration assessment, which is go get the loot and tell us how you got the loot. And so the answer to your question is, you should be doing vulnerability assessments now. If anybody on the phone has a company and you're not doing vulnerability assessments, hang up. When we get off this webinar, call your Red8 team, get a vulnerability assessment going in place. What a vulnerability assessment is going to do is give you at least a baseline of where you're at. That's always a good place. As you mature, then what you'll want to do is conduct a penetration assessment for how you break in. There's, they can be, sewn together as well, but that's where I would start. And then what I would do with that vulnerability assessment is turn that into your vulnerability management program. You all do it. I suspect that everybody on the phone, we're in southern Utah. It's very rural. I don't lock my truck at night because I'm in a very rural area, and I would probably welcome that anyway. But, when I lived in LA, in, Ventura, for 25 years, my truck was locked every night because there was a vulnerability. So my vulnerability assessment, of course, when I got out of my truck, was make sure my truck was locked, make sure my doors were locked. That's a vulnerability assessment, and you want to do that. And then what you want to do is have a program that manages those. So I would say that it just, strictly speaking, I think there's just make sure there's a distinction between the two. But if you are mature in your vulnerability management, you should be conducting penetration assessments maybe once or twice a year. It depends on, again, your threat landscape. So, and to the second part of the question is, how do you present this to your leaders up the chain? Well, you could most certainly use this deck. If Red8 is kind enough to give it to you, I'm fine with it. You'll also actually see it out on GuardSight's GitHub page, because it's part of the, I give this talk at various seminars. The Wall Street Journal is a seminar. I give this talk, and this slide is out there. And you, as far as going up the chain and making them aware, I think if you started with vulnerability assessments, that would be helpful. Like people don't understand why we're doing things, and so what you have to do is help them understand why we're doing things, or why we want to do things. And if there's two books that we hand out at GuardSight. When you first get here, one is called Mr. Garcia. Those of you that know GuardSight know this, and those, of course, that are employed here know this very much, which is figure out a way to get it done. And that's kind of the high level thing in the book. And that was given to me by a dear colleague of mine, a mentor of mine, a CISO friend of mine. He gave me that early, probably midway through my career, and it's resonated with me. I stayed with it. Get that book, read that book. You will probably answer your own question, which is, how do I get this done? And then, of course, the other book that we give, the other article that we give people is, who's got the monkey? And in terms of like you getting the monkey and being able to sling that back. So I think there's, in terms of getting it up your chain of command, you have to make them aware. You can't just walk in and tell somebody, oh my gosh, my hair is on fire. What I would say is you want to build a case for that in terms of like KPIs, KRIs, measure stuff, and then show them measurements. Like leaders of companies, I happen to be one, and my team will tell you that we're about measurement. We're about quantification. I mean, I'm a qualitative guy too. I walk around, make sure we don't have analysts hanging from the rafters because they're burnt out. But you want to make sure that you've got some quantification in there. So if you could build a quantification case to say, hey, look, here's our attack surfaces. I've went out and I've measured all of our assets. We have, it looks like we have this percentage of vulnerabilities that are critical, could hurt us. That's a really good place to start to get that communicated up the chain. As far as, toxicity in the environment, that's got to come. I mean, it comes both ways, but you can't control, the chain goes this way. And so what you have to do is start in your local domain and get that harmony going, get rid of the dysfunction in whatever way you can. Again, I would recommend Mr. Garcia. You'll find a way to get rid of the dysfunction. You have to think forward. If you're spending any time or any energy on what sucks, you'll be there forever. If there's a good book by a Navy SEAL, Brandon Webb, and he uses it's about mastering fear, and it's not about mastering fear like kung fu fear. I guess it could be, but it's more about like understanding your fear and what sets those obstacles up for you. There's a good saying in there called "There's magic on the other side." Like SEALs say this, there's magic on the other side. And so, as far as moving it up the chain, the technique there would be, Mr. Garcia, there's magic on the other side. Measure stuff and show people the stuff that you've measured. And then you might be able to crack a door open. And once you've got that door cracked open, you could just proliferate from there.